Today's episode of the Our Hen House podcast is being sponsored by our partner, A Well-Fed World. A Well-Fed World is a hunger relief and animal protection organization chipping away at two of the world's most immense, unnecessary, and unconscionable forms of suffering. The suffering of people hungry from lack of food, and the suffering of animals used and abused for food. Mending our unjust food system is a critical part of solving the world's most destructive and persistent problems. Fortunately, the plant-based foods that promote health and well-being are the same foods that conserve resources to better feed the world, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting the environment. A well-fed world provides the means for change by empowering individuals, social justice organizations, and political decision-makers to embrace the benefits of plant-based foods and farming. Learn more at awfw.org.
Our hen house is a squawking house. Our hen house is their hen house. Our hen house, ooh, it's a funky fresh house. Our hen house is your hen house.
Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Marianne Sullivan. Thanks so much for tuning in. This show it really has a lot of meaning for me, and I hope it will for you too. My guest is going to be Anat Pick, and she is really one of my favorite people. And she's also the author of the latest ebook from Hen Press, Maureen. Did you know that we had a publishing arm called Hen Press? If you didn't, you need to find out about it. Anyway, our latest publication, Maureen, by Anat, is unbelievably, it's just so moving and so deep. And she'll be joining us to talk about the book and about vulnerability and about veganism and so much more. And then to really mix it up, Jasmine will be joined by the Black Metal Chef, who she ran into at Chicago Vegan Mania very recently. Lots of you probably tune into the Black Metal Chef's wildly popular YouTube channel for somewhat bizarre but excellent cooking tips, and now you can get the inside story. I have actually had a really busy and very animal rights focused week, which is my favorite kind of week. I made it to two new vegan restaurants. That's pretty good, right? I count that as an extremely good week. As I mentioned, Anat is one of my favorite people, and I actually ran into her this past week in New York. Though she lives in London, she was visiting New York to give a talk at the NYU Animal Studies program, and it was really great to catch up with her, and it was great to do that catching up at Double O, which is the very fancy pants vegan pizza place in the East Village. And I had actually heard some mixed reviews from people, but I absolutely loved it. I mean, there aren't too many iterations of pizza, whether fancy or basic, that I don't love. And I thought their pizza was terrific, and I really liked it a lot. I also made it out to Williamsburg to go to Modern Love, which is Isa Chandra Moskowitz's new restaurant. Of course, she has a Modern Love in Omaha, and this is her new one in Brooklyn, and I also totally loved that. I had actually heard all good things about Modern Love, and it lived up to the hype. And actually, the only thing I had heard about it that could possibly be called negative was that it involved enormous amounts of food. And it is true that the portions are quite substantial. I am one of those people who thinks that's a huge plus. I like a lot of food. And it was really, really good food. So you don't get much better than that in my book. It's kind of a vegan comfort food, but made really, really well. And I ran into Isa there. It was great to catch up with her. She looks amazing. And it's great to see her back in Brooklyn, which is where her roots are. Actually, I haven't even gotten to the main event of the weekend, which was the Animal Law Conference, where I was for most of the weekend. It was held at Pace University in Lower Manhattan, and it's put on every year by the Center for Animal Law Studies and ALDF, which is, of course, the Animal Legal Defense Fund. But this was the first time it's been in New York, so that was really cool. And there's really too much going on there to talk about. It was very dense, and there were panels on the First Amendment. That was a panel that I moderated. That was amazing. Like, just a packed room full of people seriously listening intently to all of this information, packed an enormous amount of information into one hour. And there are just so many First Amendment issues when it comes to animals. There's a panel on military dogs, a panel on investments in new food technology, cruelty laws, international issues. There's so much going on. Absolutely packed with students who, that conference sells out every year faster and faster. And all of them want to learn more and more about animal law. They're passionate. It was really nice to be around. There were also lots of speakers I hadn't heard before, and that's always nice to see. It's so nice when it's actually difficult to keep up with all that's going on. And so things are really hopping when it comes to animal law, that's for sure. And things are hopping right here on the podcast as well. That was a good segue, right? As I mentioned, Anat Pick is one of my favorite people. She is also super smart and deeply passionate about animals, and she has a PhD from Oxford, in case you were wondering whether she really was super smart. She's the author of Creaturely Poetics, Animality and Vulnerability in Literature and Film. She's the co-editor of Screening Nature, Cinema Beyond the Human, and she teaches film studies at Queen Mary University of London. Talking to her is such a great experience because it always makes me think about things in new ways. She has a different take on things, and she sees things really deeply, and she's given more thought than almost anyone I know to what it means on the really deepest levels to be vegan. And you're going to love this interview. She'll be joining me right after this.
Today's episode of the Our Hen House podcast is being sponsored by brownbull.com, the creators of My Brownbull, an online program that teaches you how to cook delicious vegan recipes, improve your relationship with food, and find balance with your food and eating, all through HD video. What are these videos about? Well, you get recipes, kitchen tips, pantry staples, support on your vegan journey, and on ending the dieting roller coaster, while focusing on creating new healthy eating habits. All done with delicious vegan food, with new content added every single week. You'll be cooking all your favorites, from breakfast and brunch classics to pasta, burgers, kid-friendly, gluten-free, and raw meals, super meaty entrees, comfort food, sushi, food for the holidays, and get support on all areas related to making food choices, being vegan, improving your relationship with food, and more. And for our Hen House listeners, they're offering the online program at the discounted price of $8.99 per month by using the coupon code OurHenHouse, all one word, upon checkout. Visit brownbull.com, BROWNBLE, and join today.
Welcome to Our Hen House, Anat.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
It's really great to have you back. I always love to hear what you have to say. And this is a really exciting occasion because Hen Press, which is a division of Our Hen House, has just published Maureen, which is a short work that you have written that I absolutely love in so many different ways, and I'm excited to be talking to you about it. And you're going to be reading us a passage, but before you do, let's just start off with you telling us the story of how you met Maureen and who she was.
Okay. I don't really know that much about her, and that's sort of part of the story, but basically I live in London usually. But I'm from Tel Aviv, Israel originally, and I came to Israel to see my friend, one of my closest friends, whose mom has Alzheimer's and has been moved to a nursing home. And basically, I met Maureen when I came on this visit to the nursing home, and Maureen is just a person who happens to be sharing a room with my friend's mother. And I was very, very moved by this meeting. I had a conversation with Maureen. I had a little encounter with her, I suppose, and that was basically it. She kind of left a big impression on me, and I couldn't really forget about it. And then when I talked to you, and you said you were interested in a piece about animals, somehow the two things sort of merged together, and I thought it would be a good thing to try and figure out.
Yeah, and I think that so many of the thoughts that have come together for you because of, I don't know, the way this encounter intertwines with your feelings about animals and other vulnerable creatures really has, it's brought so many things to the surface for me as well. I mean, I'm not sure you know, but my mother had Alzheimer's before she died for many years. And so I am very familiar with those visits to the nursing home. And they can be harrowing and very moving, as this one clearly was for you. But before we go further into that, can you read us the passage that you've selected? And I'm not sure it needs too much introduction more than we've given it, but if it does, just give us the setting.
So the passage I'll be reading is a short passage where I'm visiting Mrs. Fuchs, the name of my friend's mom, and I also meet Maureen in the same room, and just a few other people, a few other characters who live or are residents on this nursing ward. And the passage just really thinking through some of the connections between vulnerable humans and vulnerable animals in the context of the institution. Okay. There are 3 beds in Mrs. Fuchs's room. The one directly across from Mrs. Fuchs is empty, but I'm surprised to discover Maureen in the bed by the door. Her hair is white, short, and soft. Her long, sullen face is still beautiful. The eyes are set deep in their sockets, eclipsing the blue of the pupils. Even when seated, Maureen is tall and wiry, like one of those bronze figures by Giacometti. Perhaps she wasn't upset in the hall. It could be the deeply set eyes, but no, her expression is stricken. Mrs. Fuchs's husband and children visit her daily. In the weeks they've been coming here, they've not seen anyone visit Maureen. What can they do? It's hard enough keeping up with one's own relative. This week, for example, Mrs. Fuchs had a catheter fitted, but the catheter hurts and Mrs. Fuchs keeps pulling it out. Every day brings fresh difficulties, life-threatening malfunctions and small irritations. Mrs. Fuchs has made progress since she arrived and has even managed to stand up and walk, but she repeatedly asks to go home. I don't like this place. Get me out of this prison. Everyone asks about home. Sophia signals us over. Girls, tell me, do I really need to stay at school? She complains that there are no teachers and that she hasn't learned anything. I need to know, she insists. Do they need me to stay or can I go home now? Girls, would you please call me a cab? No one knows what is wrong with Maureen. The fallback assumption is that she's just very old. Each night, Maureen calls out. She sits up as best she can in her bed and shouts. The nurses do not understand what she's saying, so they leave her alone. Is she in pain? They don't think so. There's nothing in her care plan and chart to suggest she's suffering. What is it then? She doesn't know where she is, that's all. Down the corridor, a voice in Yiddish cries, "Oi, oi, oi." I follow the sound until I find Mrs. Glick by the window overlooking the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, repeating over and over, "Oi, oi, oi." The caring assistants have little time to do more than is necessary, and Mrs. Glick's calls are background noise, like traffic or birdsong. Who knows what Mrs. Glick is lamenting? Perhaps she doesn't know herself. Spend long enough on the ward, and I too might get accustomed to its mysterious soundtrack. When we say that animals are silent, we mean that we're tired of listening, that we've had enough of all that squawking and squealing. We say animals can't talk, but I've always felt we understand what animals say all too well. To really listen to animals is to hear clearly of their judgment of us. It risks taking note of their colossal indictment. What choice have we got but to turn their voice into noise, like Mrs. Glick's cries? Not listening to animals relates directly to the practice of human entitlement. We talk about male privilege and white privilege, but rarely about species privilege, which is structurally similar. Often this comes down to the issue of speaking, of who gets to speak and be heard. Cloaking the animals in mythical silence is both romantic and practical, since it enshrines the abyss between them and us. And yet animals are rarely quiet. It is we who fall silent in their presence, precisely in the face of what they persistently, unendingly tell us. Animals communicate in many ways that look and sound a lot like language. My cat lets me know when she wants food or affection, or decides that I've slept in too late. My friends joke that she's my familiar, but there's plenty about her that is utterly strange. Much ink has been spilt on the evils of anthropomorphism, but what's truly interesting is our investment in the silence of the beasts. If anthropomorphizing fashions animals in our own self-image, claiming that animals lack the power to speech projects onto them our own dumbness and speechlessness, our willful misunderstandings of them. We confuse the noun and the verb. We talk about animal silence when we actively silence them. It has less to do with language and everything to do with power. Important work is undoubtedly done in the animal protection movement that speaks in the name of animals, but we must go further. Listen to what animals are already saying and let others hear. In this place, expression outlives words. Some patients repeat the same word over and over again. Others jumble their sentences. Some sit quite still, not saying a word. The particulars are incidental. Sophia called the nursing home a school. She may not have known where she was, but she knew very well where she wasn't. She wasn't at home. On subsequent visits, Sophia doggedly searched for her sweater or keys, and she always asked for a cab. The school, the sweater, the keys are symbols of loss. The loss of home, including the intimate home of oneself. It takes time and effort to figure out what others are saying. We assume out of habit that we understand the expressions of those we know best and misunderstand the expressions of unfamiliar ones. But even with those who are closest, there's a leap of faith. Just as with those who are far, there's the opposite faithless assumption. Communication is the slow art of translation. A woman in a long white ponytail approaches. It's unusual for patients to wear their hair long, but hers reaches down past the shoulders. She stops and faces us, and after a short, dramatic pause, she declares with great conviction, "The earth is burning, and the grandmother is combing her hair." I know exactly what she means.
That really, it really brings back so many of the feelings of being in a nursing home somehow, and especially the way you point out the animals and Alzheimer's patients and other patients. They're speaking all the time in so many different ways. But, and this is a quote from elsewhere in the piece, Alzheimer's disease, disability activism, and animal liberation meet at the point at which experiences we can neither fully share nor understand ask to be recognized. And so, I guess animal activists frequently say that animals are voiceless. And then other people slam them for saying that. But in so many ways they are. They don't have a voice that we really allow ourselves to understand. But the thing I really want to explore here is that elsewhere in the piece, you refer to veganism as a seeing and hearing device as an instrument for improving attention. And that seems to relate so much to our inability to understand, or willful inability to understand what animals are saying. Can you talk a little bit about how much veganism means to you in this way?
Yeah, just before I do that, I'll just say that to say that animals are voiceless is sort of the notion of voice here is a euphemism for power, because you can speak as much as you like, but if you're not in a position to be heard, then your voice is sort of meaningless. And so really I understand why animal activists are saying what they're saying, but it's also important to hear or to know that there are sounds and expressions and some sort of language-like thing going on all the time with animals. They are rarely quiet, and that's true of all vulnerable groups. So really what I'm interested in this piece is the notion of the power differential between different groups, specifically in the context of the institution. And where veganism comes in for me is exactly, it's sort of like a pair of glasses that once you decide to put it on, the world just transforms. And so it's an instrument, a technique almost, and a practice. It's very important that it's a daily practice. It's not just something it's not a one-off thing. It's a way of life, or a way of being in the world that sharpens or alters or transforms our perception of everything around us, including ourselves. And I think once that happens, it's very difficult to see the world as it was before, once the transformation has taken place. Which is why I think that things like the 30-day vegan challenge and these types of practices are useful, because they assume that once you're practicing this new way of seeing and perceiving, it would be very difficult to unsee what you've seen or heard, if we're sticking to the notion of voice.
Obviously, that's not the way everybody in the world sees it, and veganism is a word that is used by people in many different ways, but the way you use it resonates so deeply with me. It's a life-altering experience in so many ways, and I really like the idea that it actually allows us to see and like a seeing and hearing device. It's almost a tool that allows us to see the world more clearly. And one of those things that we are able to see are the vulnerabilities that and I know that vulnerability is a topic that you talk about a great deal, but
yeah.
What kinds of vulnerabilities do nursing home residents and animals share?
I talk about that in the little piece. There are all kinds of different vulnerabilities, but primarily I think it's the loss of liberty, loss of the ability to make your own choices about what you eat, how you move, when you move, if you can move at all. Your individual identity is kind of stripped away. That's not to say that this happens in all these institutions necessarily, but I think to a degree it happens everywhere. It's sort of inevitable because these places are there to sort of manage a growing number of dependent people, vulnerable people, and it's very difficult to do. So it's not sort of a blanket indictment of the care system or anything like that, but there are multiple examples. I mean, these are not nice places, and maybe there's another way of running them. There's a different way of approaching them that might allow the residents or the patients, however they're called, to live their lives differently. In the case of animals, of course, I mean, the similarities are the way in which the institution kind of debases existence and restricts it, and of course eventually eliminates it, in the case of farmed animals anyway. So I think there are quite a few similarities.
One of the things that was alluded to in the piece that you read but wasn't specifically made clear was that Maureen speaks English. I mean, she doesn't speak well, but when she speaks English, not Hebrew, which is why people don't understand her. And it puts her, like the residents of a factory farm, in a completely different world from her caretakers. I'm just wondering, like on a personal basis, whether you think this language link was one of the things that pulled you towards her or made you remember her so clearly.
It's in the piece as well. There's a little scene there where I'm in the room with my friend and my friend's mom, and then Maureen calls out, and I walk over to her bed trying to understand, just out of politeness, really. Someone is saying something, and I felt like I should respond. And then it took me a little while because she was sort of slurring her speech, and I couldn't figure out what she was saying, and I was expecting to hear Hebrew. So that was an added complication. But then I realized that she was speaking in English, and she was actually calling for a doctor, and then we somehow managed to develop some sort of a conversation, and then I found out that she was from England, and then I told her that I was living in England, and then we ended up talking a little bit about film, which she asked me what I did, and I told her that I was teaching film. So in a very short, really, it was 15 minutes or something like that, really is all it took. I managed to see that there's a person there behind the anonymous figure, or whose name was on the door, but that's the only identifying feature. She had no visitors. She had there was no member of staff attending to her, and she was clearly in distress. She wanted something. She couldn't quite explain what it was that she wanted. And for, this little space of 10, 15 minutes, we managed to form some sort of a bond. I don't know if the English was the key factor, but definitely the fact that she was from England, and here she was in Israel, a little bit out of place, maybe, and I was from Israel, a little bit out of place in England, maybe. Maybe there was a connection that worked in that way. But there was something about her that was really powerful for me. She also had a pile of books, a pile of novels, all by the same author. by her bed, and I couldn't figure out whether she was able to read them. I couldn't assess, I'm not a professional. I couldn't assess what her condition was. And the point is that it didn't really matter. We had a sort of person-to-person connection during those moments, and it meant a lot to me, and it really affected me.
It actually really affected me too, just reading it. And the one moment that really brought it home for me was when you told her that you teach film, and she said, and it took you a couple of times to figure out each thing she said, because her speech, I guess, was a little halting, but she said wonderful. There was just something so moving about that. She was being generous and recognizing you, and there was just something so beautiful about that moment where she took that moment to tell you that she thought that what you were doing was wonderful.
I know, it's amazing. There she was actually tied to the bed, which is, I think, as a safety measure, because these places are very concerned with the safety of their patients, and that really curtails the patient's freedom. So this balance between freedom of safety and safety is really very strange and problematic. But anyway, there she was, in distress, wanting someone to come and see her, telling me that no one was interested in speaking with her, and yet she found it in her heart to show an interest in what I was doing, and she seemed to take pleasure in it as well. And at that moment, the institutional framework sort of melted away, dissipated, and you could see the individual behind or inside the institution. So it transcended the institutional context, which, of course, is the same with animals. When you see animals en masse on factory farms or in other types of facilities, you don't really see the individuals. But when that individual connection is made, it changes everything.
Yeah, it absolutely changes everything. And so many institutions are set up to make it really, really difficult to see individuals. One of the expressions you used, and this was from Martin Heidegger, and explaining that animals are poor in the world. And I love the way that you turned that around, that it's not necessarily the inhabitants who are poor in the world, but the worlds we provide them with, they're so poor that we can't see them.
Yeah, in philosophy, Western philosophy anyway, there's a whole tradition of explaining why animals are basically essentially quite different to human beings, and why human beings are hierarchically superior. And there are different ways of doing it, and Heidegger is almost one of the more progressive thinkers, but he's still wedded to the idea that somehow animals are a diminished form of life, and he sees them as being poor in the world in the sense that they're not really able to be as creative and as what he calls world forming as human beings, and as reflective about their environment and so forth. But when you look at factory farms or labs or zoos or nursing homes or correctional facilities or any one of these places where living beings are confined, you understand that these environments are so reduced and so impoverished themselves that it's impossible to thrive there as a living being. And so it's not the capacities, or it's not the diminished abilities of the creature that is in the institution. It's the environment that is deprived and breeds further deprivation.
Yeah, I love the comparison of assisted living, which is a somewhat higher level of care, to zoo enrichment. Still poor, but with some kind of fake attempt to make it seem like home, or like a place where a creature can flourish.
Yeah. I think a lot of us, again, there's a huge difference in degree and everything, but so many of us, I feel like I'm living some sort of assisted living often, aided by all these gadgets and apps and technologies that make it, I don't know, they seem to curtail more than enable sometimes. Not now, obviously now we're speaking on Skype and it's very helpful. But there's something about our way of life, our current way of life, now in, let's say, the urban West, which, for all its riches and wonderful opportunities that it and technology offers, it also takes away a lot, and it props up life in a way that is, I think, sort of unhealthy and ultimately impoverished.
Would you relate that as well to the way animals live in zoos? Like, let's say in good zoos, where they're trying to make them more entertained or more fulfilled?
I mean, I guess the difference, obviously, is the question of consent. Allegedly, we're all consenting to our current way of life, whereas animals do not. I wouldn't stretch this analogy too far. I just feel that we're kind of living in zoos of our own making, and animals are confined in zoos. I don't think there's anything like a good zoo. There are less horrible ones, maybe, but I think the whole idea of a zoo is pretty unacceptable and fairly atrocious. Primarily because of the compulsory display of animals and this prurient interest that we take in them. That this idea that we just have to see them, anywhere and all the time, whenever we want to, whenever we feel like it, without any consideration of privacy or autonomy of these creatures. So I would get rid of zoos altogether.
Let's talk a little bit about resistance. And you say that we refuse to recognize it for what it is. Can you talk about that a little bit in both the context of the nursing home and in the animal facility of whatever sort?
Yeah, sure. When people or animals are vulnerable and can't fight back in very obvious ways, we tend to assume that they don't resist. But again, it's a question of attention and a finer perception, which again goes back to this notion of veganism as an aid to perception. When you look closely, you realize that there are resistances all the time and everywhere. And I saw that on the nursing ward, whether it's people refusing to eat, or whether it's people refusing to go back to their room when they're told to go, or people sort of not responding. These are maybe tiny gestures, but they're still gestures of autonomy. And people were quite insistent on what they wanted to do and what they didn't want to do. They still exercised a level of willfulness even in the context of the institution that doesn't really ask them what they want to do or what they want to eat or when they want to eat or where they want to go. They have a very regimented kind of life. And it's similar on factory farms or meatpacking plants. I mean, you could say that these institutions, these facilities are built to fight off, to fend off animal resistance. And you can see animals as they're being processed. You can see those little gestures of resistance. If you look at the way a meat packing plant is built, including the so-called humane ones designed by people like Temple Grandin, they're precisely designed to thwart resistance. So animals can't see what happens around the corner, so they wouldn't be able to resist. Why? Because they would want to resist, because nobody wants to die, because they can sense death, they can smell it, and if they could see it, they would react. So I find that often a lot of these welfarist arguments for designing more humane facilities, it's obviously better to have a so-called humane facility than to have an utterly cruel one. But these are also ways of overcoming potential animal resistance and making the whole process a lot smoother and also more profitable, therefore, for humans. And it's the nursing homes. And I should also add that people in nursing homes are often heavily medicated, and that's another way of overcoming resistance, by keeping people sort of sedated. The same thing happens with animals who are bred with congenital vulnerabilities to increase yield and to provide more meat or more eggs, but also to create animals that can barely move or that have no control over their own bodies and therefore can't resist.
The story of Maureen obviously is not about animals, but you have made it about animals. And I get the sense that for you, everything is about animals. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, everything is about animals. Animals are so fundamental to the way in which power works in the world. Because animals are in a way, it's true, they're sort of outliers. They're an extreme case. If you want to see how power operates with the fewest inhibitions, you look at animals. And so, of course, power works between human groups as well. But I think animals are an example, and a very extreme, but also the most commonplace example of the operation of power without any restraints, or with very few restraints. Of course, there are some legal restraints, and there's some window dressing on it. But what we do to animals in the industrialized West, at least, but I think even beyond that, is exemplary in terms of the unfettered operation of power. So it's a fascinating and harrowing case study, really, of how mechanisms of power work. And so it's absolutely central to everything from politics to ethics.
So what is the right approach to vulnerability? How and power? How, if we weren't going to dominate and if we weren't going to exercise power unfairly, how does it play out in the real world? I think this is actually an easier question to answer when it comes to animals than it is to answer when it comes to the vulnerable elderly or people with dementia. What are our obligations, and what is the best way to approach it?
In terms of, I'm more interested in sort of analyzing how it all works. And I'm not dodging the practical question. I can answer it. The answer is to strive towards, a minimum or to the abolition of any kind of use of animals for human purposes, in my view. Now, whether it's achievable or not is a different story, but that's the end goal for me. And how to achieve it is a much more complicated question. I don't have all the answers.
I do. I just prefer not to share them.
Okay. I have the same answers that everybody else
yeah.
has, which is, a mixture of methods and strategies. But for me, what's important is to understand what the problem is. And I think that one of the problems in understanding how this relationship between vulnerability and power is that many people think that when they encounter vulnerability, the natural response is compassion. And I have a slightly darker view. I think that one of the problems with vulnerability, there's a few problems with it. One of them is that it is actively encouraged and produced in systems like industrial farming. So it's as far away from compassion as you can get. Vulnerability is encouraged and harvested and produced in living bodies. Both, in animal bodies, of course, in factory farming, through selective breeding, genetic modification, and so on. So that's one problem, that it's not only something that it's not just something that arouses compassion. It's something that we humans actively like to produce in other creatures in order to profit from them. And then the other sort of more psychological things, I think often people don't like to admit it, and that's true for animals and for vulnerable humans too, is that the sight of vulnerability does not necessarily only arouse compassion. I think it also arouses, sometimes it can arouse disgust and recoiling. And I think until we understand that and grapple with the fact that the sight of vulnerability is complex, we won't be able to solve our responses to it. We won't be able to solve the kind of violence that seems to accompany vulnerability wherever it occurs.
Yeah, I think that's deeply, deeply true. There's this fear of identifying with the vulnerable too much that is a logical fear.
Yeah, and not wanting to admit that we are vulnerable. It's psychologically, it makes perfect